morning, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Morning Medical Update. I'm Jessica Lovell. It's winter, and just like many of you, we are working hard to bring you some fun and exciting programs in the coming weeks and months. This morning, we are bringing you a rebroadcast of one of our favorite shows. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and we will answer them during our live broadcasts on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays in January. We'll resume our Monday through Friday live schedule in February, so sit back and enjoy this best of Morning Medical Update. Good morning. It is Thursday, September 29th. I'm Jessica Lovell. Welcome in today to the Morning Medical Update. Even with no signs at all, you can still be at major risk of heart disease. Some develop it while others are born with heart issues. Today, we have three very special guests, three heart patients who will share their journey and how they found their way back to better health. Homeowners and businesses cleaning up this morning after Hurricane Ian came ashore near Fort Myers. This was a Category 4 storm. We're going to talk with one health system doctor who has seen this before all firsthand and shares his experience treating patients in a natural disaster. Plus, the COVID-19 cases here at the health system are on a slight decline. Is that still the trend overall? Dr. Hawkinson has our latest numbers. Thank you so much for being here with us on YouTube, Facebook, and on Twitter. We are live inside the Dolph C. Simons Jr. Family Broadcast Studio. 30 million Americans live with heart disease. It is the leading cause of death for both men and women in the U.S. But new treatments are leading the way to better quality of life for heart patients. Today on World Heart Day, we have a great panel of guests and people who are experts right here, Mark Wiley, and also our patients who will share their stories. Dr. Mark Wiley is chair of cardiovascular medicine here, and we are also joined by two heart transplant patients, Carol Barnett and Brian Beggs, and also Kaylee Patterson. She received a heart valve here at the health system, and it was a first of its kind procedure performed here. So good morning to all of you, and we are really looking forward to you sharing your stories with us today. Get your questions sent in to us via the links there on your screen. You can also post your questions in the chat below. First, a look in Orlando, Florida this morning, where rain and wind is leading to a lot of flooding across that city from what was once Hurricane Ian, now downgraded to Tropical Storm Ian. Joining us now to talk more about that is Dr. Andrea Vidic. He is a heart failure and transplant doctor here at the health system. Dr. Vidic, how are you today?
I'm doing very well.
Good. Well, you experienced Hurricanes Irma and Maria back to back during your time in Central Florida. You were working in a hospital with your heart patients at the time. This has got to be an incredibly stressful time for any patient, especially a heart patient. Tell us exactly what those folks are going through when something like this happens in their area.
Well, when I joined practice Orlando Health in 2017, we were having large number of transplant LVAD patients, and LVAD is a mechanical assist device where it needs to run on battery power. And during that time, it was extremely stressful for our patients because, number one, they had to barricade themselves. Number two, they had to worry about their family members. And number three, they were like, how do I make sure that I don't lose power? And our coordinators and staff were working diligently to make sure those patients, if able, move away from natural disaster. And we would encourage them to move up to Georgia or even further up to avoid these hassles. But as you know, during during the natural disasters, most of the time, people in a lower socioeconomic class are impacted. And sometimes it would be that they're running out of medicine and they don't get adequate care. And shortly after we stop watching things on news, we see a large number of patients that are coming to our health system that did not receive care for those 2-3 weeks because they had to barricade their windows, protect their family. And as a transplant cardiologist, we actually saw the largest number of patients coming in shortly afterwards. Irma was very stressful because that was my first time in Florida, and everyone's talking about hurricane. I was like, I don't know what to do. And it was stressful how to take care of my family at the same time, being on call and being in the hospital because you had to work whole day, and it was not that you can go home. It was basically curfew. So it was a difficult time, but I think with great setup and help of our transplant and LVAD coordinators, we were able to avoid any major disasters during those stressful times. Maria had different impact because if you remember, it hit Puerto Rico, and we had a large number of heart patients actually influx into Central Florida during that time, and we had to provide care on patients that we have never met before, and we had actually transplanted multiple patients during that time that we knew were going to go back to Puerto Rico, and it was a very difficult time for families and patients at the same time.
Dr. Vidic, you tell your patients now today about this story. Tell us a little bit about what you share with them when they're going through, a difficult time with their heart health, and you explain to them what you've seen down in Florida.
So, it dawned on me, I usually tell my patients, they're like, why I'm so sick? Why am I so short of breath? And why is my heart not working? I said, well, it's like hurricane is, you're sick. Hurricane is coming your way. Your pump is not working. Your basement is going to get filled with water just like your lungs are. Let's do our, let's process it that way, because if you are taking excessive amount of fluid and your pump is not working, you will basically get a new pump or a new heart. And second, if you are when you are so sick, when we have patients where it's called cardiogenic shock, usually we support them for a period of time, but it's like hurricane. First 2 days everyone does well, and then we have to do with a cleanup with medical care and hurricane, because first few days are usually easiest because we can do enough to support. And subsequently, there's a lot of work to be done. And Ms. Carol and Brian can tell us how difficult it is. It's not just taking care of for a couple of days, but it's down the line and dealing with the family, dealing with basically not having water, not having supplies to even get day by day. And similar with heart transplant patients, we forget them after they transplant, everything is fine, and there's continued to be cleanup and continues to be issues that pop up throughout their care that no one talks about it up front, or no one expects to have it up front.
This unforeseen natural disaster then putting up another barrier for these heart patients. Dr. Vidic, thank you so much for just sharing your insight and your experience with us. It kind of helps us here in the Midwest, far from the coast. You're right. A lot of us don't understand what those folks are going through. So thank you for helping kind of paint that picture for us this morning. And we do want to let everyone know that we did check with our supply chain leaders here at the health system and learned that we are not facing any shortages at this time due to Hurricane Ian. So Dr. Vidic, thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great day.
You as well. Well, more than 18 million people die after suffering a heart attack or have a stroke each and every year. Kaylee, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. You underwent a one-of-a-kind new type of procedure here at the health system. Tell us a little bit about that experience just from your perspective.
Yeah, so I had a transcatheter pulmonary valve replacement, and that is where they take, so for me, I had a bovine tissue as part of a mechanical valve. And what they do is they take a needle through my thigh, up into a vein through my leg, up into the heart, and they replace the pulmonary valve that way. And what that did is my pulmonary valve was leaking into my right ventricle, and it was causing the right ventricle to get way too large. So what that did is it made it to where the leaking from the pulmonary valve stopped, and it made it to where the right ventricle would stop growing in size.
And we're watching some video from the day of your procedure. Quite different, though, Kaylee, from years ago. Take us back 29, 30 years ago when you were young and you had open heart surgery. when you were young. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when I was 19 days old, as you said, I had open heart surgery, and so back then it's kind of funny because at that point I had the opposite problem. My heart or the pulmonary valve wasn't allowing any blood to go out into the body, so they had to actually go in and open up my chest, so then they could open up my pulmonary valve to let the oxygenated blood get out into the body, so then the rest of my body could have oxygen, could have that oxygenated blood. So coincidentally, the surgery that I had as a baby caused the issues that caused the leaking that I had as an adult. So that's something that as I was growing up, my doctors kept on saying, well, this is something that we'll have to fix at some point. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to just keep on looking back, or keep on checking into it. Every year I would have an echocardiogram. Every few years I'd have an MRI. And we just knew at some point we would have to fix this issue because it kept on increasing the size of my right ventricle.
So Dr. Wiley, I want to bring you in, and you did not treat Kaylee, but help us understand why someone might need open heart surgery. And then you fast forward to today, things have changed quite a bit, why somebody might need open heart surgery, and maybe why somebody might be a candidate for this type of valve replacement, where it seems like a less invasive type of procedure than opening someone's chest. But help us understand the difference in need for different patients.
Sure. I think age and anatomy are the big things. Early on, about a decade ago, it was certainly an honor for me to be involved with the valve program. And early on, it was just high-risk patients. And really now it's evolved to 90% of the patients we treat. So.
Carol and Brian, I want to bring you in. You both underwent a heart transplant here at the health system. Carol, I'm going to start with you because you did this right at the beginning of COVID. What was that like?
Oh, well, when my husband dropped me off at the doors on April 28th, he essentially just waved goodbye to each other. And I was thinking I was going to see him in 3 days after my evaluation, but no such luck. After a couple days, Dr. Hagelin came in and said, you can't go home till we find your heart. I will tell you that the nurses were my savior. They were there 24/7, not just for the medical things they had to do, but for just emotional support. And I thank God for the technology besides the heart, but being able to connect via Facebook or whatever we use with my family.
Yeah, you were using iPads at the time. Dr. Wiley, I can't imagine somebody going through a heart procedure where you need the love of your family, your support system, and now you can't be around them, you can't near them. You're in the middle of a pandemic. It's just got to be such a scary time. I'm sure you had to have many of those conversations.
It was very challenging. At one point in time, we really had to restrict the number of family members that could be present, and that was probably the biggest struggle for patients recovering from a cardiac procedure. So. Fortunately, the numbers have come down a little bit, and we're able to allow more family members present, but we had to get creative with, how to support the patient through that hospitalization.
Yeah, you had to really turn it up and become family members, didn't you?
You did, absolutely.
So, Carol, I have to ask you, are you getting back to traveling and doing all the things that you were doing before you had your transplant?
Yeah, I've started to do a little traveling. We have 3 daughters, and that's me doing the polar plunge in Antarctica. I love that. We have 3 daughters, and they're spread out through all the country, over the country. So if you visit one daughter, then you have to go see the other 2. So we're planning a big trip. Oh my God, we're planning a big trip next summer to go diving in the Red Sea. And talk about getting back to normal. I did my 132 push-ups this morning.
Good for you.
From my toes, so everybody knows that. Yeah.
You were legit. You're back.
I
But
am back. Yeah.
Carol, real quick, tell everyone why you needed that heart transplant.
So in 1990, 6 weeks before Tom and I got married, I was diagnosed with, I might not get the words in right order here, right arrhythmia ventricular dysplasia. And Dr. Berenbaum, my cardiologist who followed me for 30 years, had told us that because my condition was on my right ventricle, there was no mechanical device that could help me. And I was just on medicine for 30 years. And he had told us about 5 or 6 years ago that eventually I was going to need a transplant. And I put that in the back of my head because eventually I'm going to have to get a new knee and hearing aids and blah, 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 cataracts. And I just didn't want to think about it. And then in January of 2020, when we were in Africa, I started having some issues. Mm-hmm. And that led to my going in April. So I just didn't realize, quite frankly, how sick I was. My right ventricle had mm-hmm. grown over twice the size of my left.
Dr. Wiley, is that common where people don't realize how sick they are? And can it go undetected?
Yeah, I do think it's a pretty common phenomenon. You know, people compensate over time. So mm-hmm. the more chronic your cardiac issue is, sometimes you're able to compensate over time and you really don't realize how sick you are until you reach that tipping point. So yeah, it's not an uncommon thing. What
are the top 3 heart conditions that are most common in the U.S.?
You know, I would say the most common is coronary artery disease. So that classic blockage in the heart, patient having chest pain, needing a stent or bypass. That has a cascade. So if that goes unrecognized and untreated, that can lead to heart failure. And that's where we start talking about different ways, different medications, different procedures or devices to help those patients. But so those are probably the top 2 most common. I would say beyond that, rhythm issues, atrial fibrillation has a huge burden here in the United States. It's an irregular heart rhythm that we see that can put a patient at risk for stroke.
Brian, you're up next, my friend. So good to see you. You walked out of the health system with a new heart and a new bride. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But tell us what led to you needing a new heart.
So I was born with a heart murmur as a child, and it never gave me any issues. They thought it would grow closed, but it never did. I always had a slight hole, and it never gave me issues. Starting in 2016, I started to retain fluid pretty significantly, and went and got checked out. Went and saw a cardiologist who had put in a pacemaker years before, and we talked about a second lead. And when he went to do the second lead, he came in and told me that we weren't doing that because my heart was so significantly enlarged that it wasn't going to benefit me. So he told me I had to have a transplant, and I didn't react well to that. Wasn't very kind to him when he told me that. But my wife convinced me that I needed to go to KU and talk to the doctors. And within 15 minutes of meeting Dr. Sauer, I was convinced that, yeah, I could do this. And, let's get started kind of thing. So.
Wow. That's a long time to live, just constantly concerned about your heart. I mean, where everything comes from, Dr. Wiley. That's these patients live wondering if a transplant's coming up next, if they're going to have a heart attack. I mean, that's got to be a scary time.
Yeah, I think a lot of patients, it's really hard to kind of take that step and decide when they need something done.
Right.
So a lot of heart transplant patients, you have medications for several years until you kind of reach that tipping point and that realization that something more needs to be done. So it is tough. That's tough decision making.
And you think of I know there's a lot of big procedures that happen, but nothing seems as big as like a heart transplant.
I agree. And these are amazing people that work with the team, and it's really amazing to see the outcome. just the lives that have been changed.
Brian, though, good news is I asked you how you're doing today, and you said, well, the nurse, when I come to see her, she says I'm kind of boring. I'm a boring patient. So in this case, that's a good thing, right? Because you're kind of low maintenance now.
I absolutely am. My labs are always consistent. I never really have to deal with a whole lot of changes to my meds anymore. So yeah, I'm the boring one and happy to be so.
That's right. That's right. We're going to take a quick break. I want to hear about the wedding, and I want to hear about the support group that you are a part of, because that has been a big thing for you. So, but let's check in with Dr. Dana Hawkinson, Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control, joining us with our COVID count and some COVID headlines this morning. Good morning to you.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, in the hospital, you kind of, as you alluded to, our cases, active cases continue to be, under 30, which they had been really in that low 30 number for quite some time. But right now, 26 active infections in the hospital, 5 in the ICU, 5 still on the ventilator, and 22 in that recovery period. Overall, just 2 days, but hopefully this trend will continue, because we know, again, in the United States, cases and hospitalizations have been really trending down for the past several weeks. So.
Dr. Hawkinson, German researchers found even a mild case of COVID-19 can lead to heart problems. The virus can cause inflammation in it found inflammation in 73% of the MRI scans that were done.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about that, but if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Dr. Wiley first, and then I'll bounce back to you. What are you hearing about that? Does that seem like a study that has some substantial evidence there?
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. Early on with COVID, that was one of our main concerns, was how do we deal with the systemic infection of COVID? And so it impacts multiple organ systems, and the heart's one of them. So we really put a lot of thought early on as to how this was going to impact student athletes and patients long term. We've been watching to determine whether or not any further intervention needs to be done, or if there's an uptick in heart rhythm problems because of that. And so far, we haven't really seen any major changes or major upticks from that.
Dr. Hawkinson, what can you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there was a lot of initial concern, especially as we were talking about student athletes, looking at their heart. And I think there was a lot of data coming out of the Big Ten looking at that, and they are doing this by looking at MRI. So this is a radiologic procedure to look at different parts of your body. They were specifically looking at the heart for these. And some of these are subclinical, meaning people may or may not have symptoms, but they can see evidence of that inflammation on those MRI studies, just as Dr. Wiley said. So, yeah.
All right, Dr. Hawkinson, thank you so much. Do we have any reporter questions on the line today? All right, we are going to get to, one community question. Jen wants to know, Carol, since, she was asking you about visitor. What was the toughest part about not being able to see your husband during that time? You had mentioned that this was tough, but you were happy to have iPads.
I'll tell you, just the power of touch. Just to hold his hand. He's my best friend, and that was difficult, but he was also very positive and extremely encouraging to me when we talked every day, and obviously sometimes more than once a day. So that was difficult, but as I said earlier, I don't know how I would have made it through all this without the nurses. They were just,
right.
Whether it was 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, they were there to talk about my life, or sometimes their life. These nurses feel like they're 12 years old, so I could hear about their hopes and dreams and about their lives. So that was wonderful to have.
And Carol, they were going through so much during that time too, a time of COVID.
Absolutely.
So they probably needed you just as much as you needed them in some cases.
Right.
Dr. Wiley, Joellen wants to know, what is an interventional cardiologist? Is that a new specialty?
Yeah, so interventional cardiology is basically a subspecialty within cardiology, but it's more procedure-based. Okay. So most of what an interventional cardiologist does is stent procedures, valve replacements like Kaylee had. So more procedure-based. We do general cardiology, so we see all comers, but most of the practice of an interventional cardiologist is really procedure-based.
Okay. Jean wants to know, what would you do to reduce heart inflammation?
Yeah, so in the setting of COVID, really it's the recovery process. So it just takes time. There are longitudinal studies that are going to be done looking at patients who have COVID. I saw a feed from a newswire about increased rhythm issues. That may be COVID related. Inflammation in general, if it's a chronic inflammatory situation, that's where we have to get our cardiology team involved and figure out what the best approach is, because there are different causes for it.
Juan wants to know, can stem cell therapy be used for cardiovascular disease? Has this been studied at all? What do we know?
Yeah, I'd say over the last 10 years I've been involved intermittently with some of the stem cell projects here at KU. We've tried to look at different ways that we use regenerative medicine to heal a scar. Really, there's not anything that has been successful with stem cells in the cardiac space yet. It's still evolving. It's really a tough space to get from bench to patient.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take a break. Keep sending in your questions for us today, Brian. Okay, I had said you walked out of here with two really important things, probably your two favorite things in the world. First, your wife. You walked out of here with your wife, getting married in our chapel, and your new heart. Tell us about that, because we're going to take a little walk down memory lane, and this was right before COVID. This is one of the first stories I did when I came here to the health system.
Yes, so 7 days post-transplant, I proposed. I would not be here without her and without KU, so it just seemed appropriate to get married in the chapel there. She pushed me to get ready for transplant, got me through transplant. Carol, I don't know how you did it without help. It's just amazing. She's been there all the way. And I told her when I proposed, I said, you had part of the old heart and I want you to have all of the new one and share it with me.
Oh, Brian, that's good. That's really good. I like that. You got engaged here. I remember you'd shared that as well. So you guys got engaged up in your room, I think. And then 7 days later, Chaplain Kathy Riegelman married you.
A year to the day after my transplant.
That was so fantastic. Another way you found support too was through, are you part of the transplant support group here? Is that correct?
Yeah.
How helpful has that been? You guys, you all come together and talk about your new organs? Is that how that works and how you're doing?
It's a Facebook group. We reach out. We're there to support each other, answer questions for the newer folks. If anything new comes up with those of us who are a little ways out, we reach out. I mean, it's just a great way to, these are my brothers and sisters in transplant, so we're here for each other. Try to support each other, try to reach out even to the folks who are waiting for transplant. I visited one of the other transplants before he got his heart and talked to him and, just kind of tried to put his mind at ease that, you can get through this, so they've been a great help.
Well, you become a part of just an important club, one you didn't think you'd be a part of, but you are now, and it's probably one of the most important places you stand each day. So thank you for the support you're getting and giving. I want to get to a couple more questions. Brian, I know you've got a scooch here in just a moment. A question from Eric for Kaylee is, how are you taking care of your heart now? What are some of the biggest changes you've had to make or have been making or have made throughout your entire life?
So the biggest thing I've done since the surgery is really just focus on what I've been putting into my body, which sounds like such an adult answer. I've really focused on my sodium intake. That's been the biggest thing. Is I've been really looking at the back of the nutrition box or of each box, or just looking at the nutrition label and just been how much sodium is the daily value. And I've been also doing 30 minutes of uninterrupted cardio a day. And for me, that's 30 minutes of walking, which is what my cardiologist said to do. Dr. Zorn says you don't have to necessarily run. You can go as slow as you want. It just has to be 30 minutes nonstop. And that is what is needed for a healthy heart. It doesn't have to be going 30 minutes as hard as you can. It's just about going at your own pace. So for me, I go at it's a quick walk, but it's not a jog. It's not a sprint. It's at a it's at a good speed though.
Yeah, and probably consistent. Dr. Wiley, that brings me to my next question. Let's talk about food and heart, and what truly are the good heart food. We talk about the wine and the chocolate and the salmon and the walnuts, but are those really helping us? I know that's an overall good diet. And then what should we definitely be avoiding?
Yeah, that's a very common question that we get in the clinic. And my take on it really is to avoid the things you know are bad for you. That's an easy thing to do first, right? So fried foods, fast food, and really focus on clean eating. Kind of that Mediterranean style of diet, I think, is a very healthy approach. Portion size is big here in the U.S. We all were taught to eat everything on our plate. So really controlling your portions and eating clean.
It's just going with what you kind of already know, right? Just the basics of what mom and dad taught you about eating. Keep the junk at a minimum.
Yeah, there's really no magic secret here. It's just eating clean and eating healthy.
But that Mediterranean diet is something we hear a lot on this program.
Yes.
For sure. Real quick, just from you, Brian, what are some of the changes you've had to make? I know you said you lost weight.
Increased activity level. Definitely watching what I eat. Sodium it's a nightmare for me. So I mean, I went low sodium to no sodium at all pre-transplant, and just continued that, and that's made a big difference.
Hey, Carol, real quick, what has been your biggest change?
I was very active before my transplant. So for me, it's been really learning to manage my stress better.
Yeah.
And being more mindful of that, and of my daughters always laugh at me, but trying to slow down.
Yeah.
I'm a very active person, and so that has been if I'd say anything, is mind your stress is huge.
Yeah. Dr. Wiley, you agree? I mean, we talk about what we put in our bodies and the exercise, but we got to remember about the mind and just slowing down a bit.
Yeah, I think that's good advice for everybody. It's really just kind of taking that time, and we have a lot of stressors throughout the day, and that contributes to kind of an unhealthy situation. If you're always anxious or stressed, it's very difficult, from a blood pressure standpoint. But I think it is mind, and it is also what you put in your body.
A couple more questions. Dr. Wiley, a new report out of the UK says that more people have been dying this year due to irregular heartbeats. What do you think of this study? It's interesting. I caught wind of that, and it looks like in the first quarter of the year over in the UK, there have been kind of an excess number of deaths that are rhythm related. In addition to that, they have an increased number of ischemic heart disease events, which sounds like heart attacks. In my mind, looking at that study, a lot of the issues that they're having over there are access to health care. So it's delaying your care. So some of these issues, like a blocked artery, may go unrecognized or unmanaged for a bit, which can lead to heart rhythm problems. So it's going to be something that we really need to watch. Angela wants to know, how do you know if you have a heart inflammation?
There's not necessarily a good way. There is a blood test. There's a blood test called a high sensitivity CRP that we can check. That's a non-specific marker, short of imaging like a cardiac MRI, such as what we discussed earlier. Those are probably the ways to approach it. So oftentimes when we see patients and we want to screen them for cardiac disease or cardiac inflammation, high sensitivity CRP or some blood testing is one of the avenues that we take.
What's the difference between heart disease and heart failure? Because people live with both. When somebody says I have heart failure, it's actually, it goes over a long period of time, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So heart failure is more of a continuum. It focuses more of the terminology on the heart pump function and how people feel. Heart disease can really span a number of different things, from blocked arteries in the heart to proteins that collect in the heart to heart rhythm problems. So really differentiating heart failure, which is the end result of a lot of those, where the pump is not as strong and it's not working as well and people are short of breath. That's a differentiator, really. So heart disease leads to heart failure.
Last question. Talk about myocarditis and COVID. And with COVID and post-vaccine, what are you seeing? And both of you could jump in here on this one.
I would say myocarditis, that's the concern that we were having in student athletes. So the inflammation that we see, And it's difficult to know if that is related to the vaccine, the body's response to the vaccine, or the body's response to the infection. There are probably some similarities and overlap there. I've had a lot of conversations with patients about, does the vaccine cause heart inflammation and myocarditis? There are some signals that it could, although not to the extent of the actual infection. So it's something that we watch. It's usually subclinical. It doesn't have a significant impact, but it's something that we have been tracking in the news and in the literature.
Let's get to our final thoughts today, Brian. We'll start with you.
All right. I'm just glad to be a part of this, and I'm happy to be part of the Heart family. I am, and the KU family, and just I'm very happy to be here at all. I mean, honestly.
Brian, thank you so much. We're happy you're here too, and you're part of our family. And stay in touch and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kaylee, your final thoughts for us today.
Yeah, I think my final thoughts are just, if you feel as if something is wrong in your body, it doesn't hurt to go get it checked out, because you never know what could be happening. I kind of originally I kind of was just like, oh, I think I'm just getting older, and I had these chest pains, and it was something that was, or I had these heart problems all my life, but I finally was like, no, I should probably go see my cardiologist, and it was something that and obviously I needed surgery, so just go ahead and go get checked out if something seems wrong.
Kaylee, thank you so much for being with us today and just being a great advocate for great heart health. Thank you. Carol, wrap this panel up and give us some final thoughts. It's been so great to catch up with you today.
Thank you so much. So I would comment that consider becoming an organ donor. And the reason I say that is my heart is that of a woman who was in her 20s. So clearly, in order to be a donor, you need to be in good health. Mm-hmm. And you need to have the presence of mind to want to pay it forward. In order to do that, you need to stay healthy. But it's a beautiful, it's an ultimate gift. And then the next thing I would say is find a way, your way to find gratitude every day that's out there.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Carol, thank you so much. What a great message from all of you. Thank you so much. And I know you're all so grateful. So thank you. Dr. Wiley, your final thoughts today.
I'm just very grateful for the panel here, for having the courage to get on the show and tell their stories, because I think it means a lot to the patients out there and people out there to hear. So I just want to say thank you for participating and having the courage to tell your story, So thanks for having me on.
You bet. Thanks for being here as always. Dr. Hawkinson, final thoughts today.
Yeah, I'd just like to bring it back to infections. And really kind of emphasize the point that Dr. Wiley made about the myocarditis question in vaccination versus infection. He said, your risk of myocarditis and your risk of more problems with myocarditis from the infection itself, from SARS-CoV-2 infection or COVID, is much, much greater than any myocarditis, any data that we've seen from the really self-limited myocarditis from the vaccination. So vaccination continues to be very safe and very effective, and continue to encourage people to get vaccinated and be up to date with their vaccine.
Thanks, Doc Hawk.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and open mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now everywhere podcasts are available.